"They took everything from me," she cried. The cowboy said, "Then I'll give it back and more." Dust covered the main street as a young woman, tears in her eyes, broke down in front of everyone. Her voice cracking, she confessed, "They took everything from me." A tense silence fell over the town until a giant cowboy, fresh off the trail, stepped forward and said firmly, "Then I'll give it back, and more." Before continuing, tell me in the comments, do you think a single encounter can change the course of an entire life? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this Old West story is full of twists and turns you won't want to miss. The relentless Arizona sun beat down on Prescott's dusty plaza, a fittingly harsh welcome in 1886. It was here, amidst the rising heat and the indifferent murmur of the townsfolk, that Abigail Turner collapsed. Her calico dress, once a symbol of her family's modest prosperity, was torn and stained, mirroring the deep ravages etched onto her young face. Tears, hot and defiant, traced clean paths through the grime, a stark testament to a grief too profound for the sparse words that escaped her lips. "They took everything from me," she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. The very air seemed to hold its breath, absorbing the raw, unvarnished agony of her confession. From the periphery of the crowd, a figure emerged, a silhouette against the glare that seemed to absorb the very light. Nathaniel Brooks was a man carved from the rugged landscape he called home, his frame immense, his shoulders broad, carrying a quiet strength that spoke of burdens borne and battles fought unseen. He had ridden in from the imposing Bradshaw Mountains, a place as unforgiving and beautiful as the man himself. He approached Abigail not with pity, but with a steady, unyielding purpose. He knelt beside her, his large, calloused hand gently closing over hers, a silent anchor in her storm of despair. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble, calm yet resonant, with an implicit promise that cut through the despair like a well-aimed shot. "Then I'll give it back, and more." It was a vow that echoed with a conviction that transcended mere restitution. It hinted at a deeper restoration, a rebuilding not just of what was lost, but of what could be. This simple, powerful exchange, witnessed by a handful of weary souls, marked the precipice of a story deeply rooted in the very essence of the American West. It was a tale not merely of frontier hardship, but of the enduring human spirit and the redemptive power of love found in the most desolate of circumstances. Abigail's world, once defined by the rolling hills of her family's ranch near Jerome, had been brutally shattered by the ruthless bandit Elias Crow. Crow, a man whose ambition had curdled into a thirst for power and plunder, had left behind a trail of destruction, claiming lives and livelihoods with equal impunity. Abigail's father lay dead, the lifeblood of their ranch, their cattle, stolen. She, a survivor in a land that offered little comfort to the vanquished, found herself adrift, her future as barren as the sun-baked earth. Prescott, for all its burgeoning civilization, offered little solace. Fear, a palpable entity in crows. Wake had a stranglehold on the territory. Whispers of his cruelty were enough to deter any would-be hero. Yet Nathaniel Brooks was no ordinary man. His reputation preceded him, a rancher of formidable strength and resilience, yet also a man haunted by his own ghosts. The loss of his family, a tragedy that had driven him to seek refuge in the solitude of the mountains, had sculpted his character, leaving him with a profound understanding of grief and a quiet, unwavering resolve. His encounter with Abigail was not an act of charity, but a recognition of a shared understanding of loss, a silent acknowledgement of the darkness that had touched both their lives. Their paths, it seemed, were destined to intertwine in this unforgiving landscape. Abigail, reeling from the violation of her home and the murder of her father, was a fragile ember of hope in a world plunged into shadow. Nathaniel, a man who had learned to live with the quiet ache of absence, found himself drawn to the flicker of defiance in her eyes, a spark that refused to be extinguished. The promise he made, "Then I'll give it back, and more," was more than just words. It was an unspoken pact, a commitment to reclaim not just possessions, but dignity, security, and perhaps a future that had been cruelly snatched away. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, a testament to the enduring strength of the human heart against the backdrop of a harsh and unforgiving frontier. Their journey would be one of shared pain, burgeoning trust, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a life from the ashes of devastation. The shadow of Elias Crow's tyranny extended far beyond the immediate devastation of Abigail's ranch. His control over the vital arteries connecting Prescott and Flagstaff meant that every wagon, every rider, every whisper of dissent was subject to his brutal oversight. This pervasive fear choked the nascent settlements, stifling any nascent sense of community or collective action. For Abigail, this meant more than just the loss of her family's legacy. It represented a world where justice was a forgotten relic, replaced by the chilling efficiency of unchecked malevolence. Nathaniel recognized this systemic oppression, understanding that confronting Crow wasn't merely about personal vengeance, but about reclaiming the very possibility of a stable, civilized existence for all the settlers. Consequently, his initial refuge for Abigail, a disused corral on the outskirts of town, became more than just a shelter. It was a clandestine sanctuary where the seeds of resistance could be cautiously sown, away from Crow's prying eyes. Within the confines of that abandoned structure, Abigail grappled with an internal tempest. The raw shock of her trauma warred with a nascent, almost defiant flicker of hope, ignited by Nathaniel's improbable promise. Her days were a blur of stifled sobs and the gnawing emptiness left by her father's absence. Yet each time Nathaniel's imposing figure appeared, a subtle shift occurred. He brought with him not just provisions, but a quiet fortitude that seemed to absorb some of her terror. He spoke little of his own past, his silence a testament to a grief he kept carefully guarded. However, the shared vulnerability that began to bloom between them, nurtured by the shared threat of Crow's dominion, chipped away at their respective defenses. This burgeoning connection, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, was a delicate bloom in a harsh wilderness. The first direct clash with Crow's enforcers occurred near Camp Verde, a strategic outpost that served as a grim reminder of the ongoing struggle for control in the territory. Nathaniel, escorting Abigail to a safer location, encountered two of Crow's men, their swagger and contempt for anyone who dared to cross their path evident in their aggressive posture. This wasn't a planned confrontation, but an unavoidable entanglement born of Crow's far-reaching influence. The encounter was swift and brutal, a visceral demonstration of the forces at play. Nathaniel's decisive action, protecting Abigail, with an almost primal ferocity, underscored the depth of his commitment, a silent vow extending far beyond mere restitution. It was a stark illustration of the immediate dangers they faced, a preview of the escalating conflict that lay ahead. As the days bled into nights, the shared experience around their meager campfire deepened their nascent bond. Abigail, emboldened by Nathaniel's quiet strength, found the courage to articulate the paralyzing fear that had gripped her since the attack. She spoke of the phantom sounds of shattering glass, the chilling echo of her father's final cry, the sickening realization of her utter helplessness. Nathaniel, in turn, offered a glimpse into the chasm of his own past, recounting the devastating loss of his wife in Tucson years prior. He described the way the world had seemed to tilt on its axis, the crushing weight of an emptiness that threatened to consume him. These shared confessions, whispered into the vastness of the desert night, were more than mere exchanges of sorrow. They were acknowledgments of shared humanity, building a fragile bridge of understanding between two souls scarred by profound loss. The escalating brutality of Elias Crow reached a terrifying new level when he orchestrated the fiery destruction of a neighboring homestead, a deliberate act of terror meant to cow any potential opposition. This brazen act of barbarism, witnessed from a distance as an inferno painted the night sky, served as a galvanizing moment for Nathaniel. The passive observation of suffering was no longer an option. He understood that Crow's reign of terror would only cease through direct confrontation. Consequently, he made the fateful decision to meet Crow on his own terms, choosing the rugged, unforgiving terrain of the Bradshaw Mountains as the battleground. This strategic choice was not merely about tactical advantage, but a symbolic embrace of the very landscape that had shaped him, a place where he felt most capable of confronting the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. The decision to confront Crow in the Bradshaw Mountains was not merely a tactical maneuver. It was a deep-seated imperative born from a fundamental shift in Nathaniel's perspective. Having witnessed the devastating impact of Crow's unchecked aggression, particularly the burning of the neighboring homestead, Nathaniel recognized that passive endurance had become complicity. He understood that true strength lay not in enduring hardship in isolation, but in actively defending the fragile. Seeds of civilization against the encroaching wilderness of lawlessness. This realization spurred a meticulous phase of preparation, a period where resilience was tempered with strategic foresight. Abigail, no longer a passive victim, embraced this new reality with a fierce determination. The fear that had once paralyzed her began to transmute into a potent resolve. She actively sought instruction, her hands, once accustomed to the gentle tending of a family farm, now learning the firm grip of a firearm. The weight of the rifle, its cold steel a stark contrast to the warmth of her father's hand, became a symbol of her reclaiming agency, her commitment to becoming an active participant in her own survival and in the defense of her community. Furthermore, Nathaniel's call to action resonated beyond their immediate plight. He understood that the scattered settlers, each isolated by distance and the ever-present threat of banditry, were stronger united. He began reaching out, not with grand pronouncements of war, but with quiet appeals to shared necessity and a common desire for security. He spoke of the future they could build, a future free from the constant specter of violence, a future where their children could grow without the shadow of fear. This subtle yet persistent outreach began to gather momentum. Farmers who had previously bolted their doors against any stranger now cautiously emerged, their distrust slowly eroded by Nathaniel's unwavering integrity and Abigail's quiet courage. A small but determined contingent of locals, their own grievances against Crow mounting, began to coalesce around Nathaniel's leadership, their collective resolve hardening with each shared story of loss and their growing hope for a future free from tyranny. This burgeoning alliance transformed the preparation into a shared undertaking. The corral, once a refuge, became a makeshift training ground. Nathaniel, drawing on his own hard-won experience, taught the settlers the fundamentals of marksmanship, emphasizing accuracy and strategic positioning over brute force. He stressed the importance of coordinated movement, of understanding that their individual strengths, when combined, formed an unbreakable shield. Abigail, her initial apprehension giving way to a surprising aptitude, became a testament to the fact that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Her growing proficiency with a rifle, A skill honed through diligent practice served as an inspiration to others, demonstrating that even those who had never held a weapon could become formidable defenders of their homes and their way of life. The strategic focus shifted towards identifying Crow's vulnerabilities and planning a decisive engagement. Nathaniel, intimately familiar with the rugged terrain of the Bradshaw Mountains, began to map out potential ambush points, considering the natural advantages the landscape offered. He understood that directly confronting Crow's larger, more experienced force in an open field would be a costly endeavor. Therefore, the plan evolved to leverage the natural contours of the land, to turn the very mountains that had been Crow's sanctuary into his potential tomb. This meticulous planning phase was characterized by quiet intensity, each decision weighed against the lives of those who had placed their trust in Nathaniel. The collective effort, from the sharpening of blades to the careful rationing of ammunition, reflected a deep understanding of the stakes involved, not just the recovery of stolen property, but the very soul of their burgeoning community. The unity forged in these preparations was as vital as any weapon, a testament to the power of shared purpose in the face of overwhelming adversity. The final confrontation was slated for a narrow canyon, a natural amphitheater carved by ancient rivers, its towering rock walls promising both strategic advantage and perilous entrapment. Nathaniel had chosen this location with a grim calculus, understanding that Crow's men, accustomed to open skirmishes, might be unnerved by the confined, echoing space. The air that morning was thick with an almost tangible anticipation, a charged stillness that preceded the storm. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, the assembled settlers took their positions, a motley but determined force, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Abigail, positioned, with a small group of women and older men tasked with providing supporting fire from a higher vantage point, felt a tremor run through her, a physical manifestation of the immense pressure of the moment. Her earlier practice had instilled a degree of competence, but the reality of impending violence was a far more visceral teacher. The initial engagement was a thunderous eruption of gunfire, the sharp cracks echoing off the canyon walls, amplifying the chaos. Crow's men, caught somewhat by surprise by the organized resistance and the strategically placed defensive positions, initially faltered. Nathaniel, a towering figure at the heart of the conflict, moved with a deliberate, powerful grace, his rifle spitting fire with deadly accuracy. He directed his fighters with concise, shouted commands, his voice cutting through the din, a beacon of calm amidst the maelstrom. The settlers, drawing strength from his presence and their shared purpose, fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a newfound sense of empowerment. They were defending not just property, but the very idea of a future where they could live. Without fear, a future they were now actively fighting to secure. However, Crow was a seasoned adversary, his ruthlessness matched by a cunning born of years spent evading the law. He adapted quickly, his men flanking the settlers' positions, attempting to force them out into the open. The confined space, which had initially seemed an advantage for the defenders, also limited their maneuverability, making them vulnerable to concentrated assaults. It was during one such desperate push by Crow's forces that Nathaniel found himself isolated, attempting to rally a faltering line of defense. A fusillade of bullets ripped through the air, and in the swirling dust and smoke, a searing pain erupted in his shoulder. He stumbled, his formidable presence momentarily compromised, a gasp escaping his lips that was lost in the cacophony of battle. From her elevated position, Abigail witnessed Nathaniel's incapacitation. The sight was a gut-wrenching blow, threatening to unravel the fragile composure she had painstakingly maintained. The fear, momentarily suppressed, surged back with a terrifying intensity. Yet in that instant of perceived disaster, something fundamental shifted within her. The memory of her father's pleas, the image of Crow's triumphant cruelty, and the sound of Nathaniel's unwavering promise coalesced into a singular burning purpose. She saw the immediate danger to Nathaniel and the potential collapse of their entire defense if he were to fall. The fear did not vanish, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective instinct, a primal urge to defend the man who had promised, to restore what was stolen. With a newfound, almost reckless courage, Abigail broke from her position. Scrambling down the rocky embankment, she ignored the shouts of her companions, her eyes fixed solely on the unfolding drama below. She moved with a speed and agility born of adrenaline, her rifle held steady despite the trembling in her hands. Her approach, unexpected and audacious, drew the attention of the bandits nearest to Nathaniel. She fired, not with the practiced precision of Nathaniel, but with a raw, unrefined power. Her shots, though perhaps not perfectly aimed, were effective, forcing the attackers to break their focus on the downed rancher. This diversion, however brief, was critical. It provided a crucial window for Nathaniel to regain his footing, to muster his remaining strength, and to continue the desperate struggle. The fight was far from over, but Abigail's courageous intervention had irrevocably altered the trajectory of the battle, demonstrating that true strength often emerges from the most unexpected of sources, fueled by a love that refused to be, silenced by fear or loss. The raw, untamed energy of the canyon battle had reached its apex. Nathaniel, bleeding but unbowed, managed to rise, his gaze locking onto Elias Crow, who stood at the center of the dwindling bandit ranks, a sneer twisting his lips. The immediate threat to Nathaniel had galvanized Abigail, transforming her from a terrified observer into a determined participant. Her earlier actions had not only disrupted the enemy's immediate assault, but had also instilled a renewed sense of urgency and focus within the settler ranks. The carefully orchestrated defensive positions, which had initially been designed to repel a frontal assault, now needed to be adapted to counter Crow's desperate flanking maneuvers. The very terrain that had offered concealment now threatened to become a trap, forcing the defenders to constantly reassess their lines of engagement. Furthermore, the sight of Nathaniel wounded, though a grave concern, had ignited a fierce protectiveness within Abigail that transcended mere personal attachment. It was a profound recognition of his role as the linchpin of their collective resistance. Her intervention had not only saved him in that critical moment, but had also served as a powerful catalyst, reminding the settlers of what they were fighting. For now, not just the recovery of property, but the preservation of their nascent community and the very notion of a just society. This shared understanding of the stakes, amplified by the visceral reality of combat, solidified their purpose. The scattered shots that had preceded Abigail's direct involvement now coalesced into a more coordinated volley, as individuals, inspired by her bravery, began to anticipate enemy movements and provide covering fire for their comrades. Conversely, the psychological impact of Abigail's unexpected defiance was not lost on Crow. He had viewed the settlers as easily intimidated farmers and ranchers, ill-equipped for the brutal realities of frontier warfare. Abigail's active participation, her willingness to engage directly with his men, shattered that perception. It demonstrated a depth of commitment and a fierce resilience that Crow had underestimated. This realization forced him to recalibrate his strategy, shifting from a confident offensive to a more desperate holding pattern. His men, witnessing their leaders' growing frustration and the unexpected tenacity of their opponents, began to feel the strain. The initial bravado that had characterized their advance started to erode, replaced by a dawning awareness that this was not the easy victory they had anticipated. Another crucial layer to this unfolding conflict was the subtle shift in the settlers' own internal dynamics. The shared peril had forged an unspoken camaraderie, transcending previous differences or minor disputes. Neighbors who might have previously quarreled over water rights or stray livestock now fought shoulder to shoulder, their common enemy creating an immediate and compelling unity. Nathaniel's quiet leadership had always been a unifying force, but Abigail's emergence as a courageous defender further cemented this bond. She represented not just a victim seeking justice, but a symbol of the community's collective will to resist. This shared experience of confronting overwhelming odds, of actively participating in their own defense, began to fundamentally reshape their identities as a community, transforming them from isolated individuals into a cohesive unit bound by shared sacrifice and mutual reliance. The fight for their land had, in essence, become a fight for their very soul as a community. The raw, untamed energy of the canyon battle had reached its apex. Nathaniel, bleeding but unbowed, managed to rise, his gaze locking onto Elias Crow, who stood at the center of the dwindling bandit ranks, a sneer twisting his lips. The immediate threat to Nathaniel had galvanized Abigail, transforming her from a terrified observer into a determined participant. Her earlier actions had not only disrupted the enemy's immediate assault, but had also instilled a renewed sense of urgency and focus within the settler ranks. The carefully orchestrated defensive positions, which had initially been designed to repel a frontal assault, now needed to be adapted to counter Crow's desperate flanking maneuvers. The very terrain that had offered concealment now threatened to become a trap, forcing the defenders to constantly reassess their lines of engagement. Furthermore, the sight of Nathaniel wounded, though a grave concern, had ignited a fierce protectiveness within Abigail that transcended mere personal attachment. It was a profound recognition of his role as the linchpin of their collective resistance. Her intervention had not only saved him in that critical moment, but had also served as a powerful catalyst, reminding the settlers of what they were fighting, for not just the recovery of property, but the preservation of their nascent community and the very notion of a just society. This shared understanding of the stakes, amplified by the visceral reality of combat, solidified their purpose. The scattered shots that had preceded Abigail's direct involvement now coalesced into a more coordinated volley, as individuals, inspired by her bravery, began to anticipate enemy movements and provide covering fire for their comrades. Conversely, the psychological impact of Abigail's unexpected defiance was not lost on Crow. He had viewed the settlers as easily intimidated farmers and ranchers, ill-equipped for the brutal realities of frontier warfare. Abigail's active participation, her willingness to engage directly with his men, shattered that perception. It demonstrated a depth of commitment and a fierce resilience that Crow had underestimated. This realization forced him to recalibrate his strategy, shifting from a confident offensive to a more desperate holding pattern. His men, witnessing their leader's growing frustration and the unexpected tenacity of their opponents, began to feel the strain. The initial bravado that had characterized their advance started to erode, replaced by a dawning awareness that this was not the easy victory they had anticipated. Another crucial layer to this unfolding conflict was the subtle shift in the settlers' own internal dynamics. The shared peril had forged an unspoken camaraderie, transcending previous differences or minor disputes. Neighbors who might have previously quarreled over water rights or stray livestock now fought shoulder to shoulder, their common enemy creating an immediate and compelling unity. Nathaniel's quiet leadership had always been a unifying force, but Abigail's emergence as a courageous defender further cemented this bond. She represented not just a victim seeking justice, but a symbol of the community's collective will to resist. This shared experience of confronting overwhelming odds, of actively participating in their own defense, began to fundamentally reshape their identities as a community, transforming them from isolated individuals into a cohesive unit bound by shared sacrifice and mutual reliance. The fight for their land had, in essence, become a fight for their very soul as a community. Moreover, the specific tactical adjustments made by Nathaniel in response to Crow's shifting tactics highlighted a deeper aspect of leadership under duress. Recognizing that Crow's men were attempting to exploit the canyon's natural choke points to their advantage, Nathaniel began directing his fighters to utilize the higher ground more aggressively. This wasn't merely a matter of repositioning, it was a strategic adaptation that leveraged the terrain's verticality, forcing Crow's forces to expose themselves as they attempted to ascend the slopes. Consider how this mirrors real world situations where adaptability in the face of an opponent's evolving strategy is paramount. A business might pivot its marketing approach when a competitor releases a new product, or a military unit might change its formation when facing unexpected enemy maneuvers. The settlers, guided by Nathaniel's insights, began to implement a strategy of controlled aggression, drawing Crow's men into carefully chosen kill zones where their numerical superiority was negated by the settlers' tactical advantage. This phase of the battle also underscored the psychological toll of prolonged conflict on both sides. For the settlers, the initial surge of adrenaline had begun to wane, replaced by the grinding exhaustion of sustained combat. Yet, their resolve remained unbroken, bolstered by the tangible progress they were making and the growing realization that victory was within reach. Abigail, in particular, found a new reservoir of strength, her earlier fear replaced by a focused determination. She moved with a newfound confidence, her actions no longer driven by panic, but by a clear understanding of her role in the defense. This internal transformation was as critical to their success as any physical maneuver. The ability to maintain mental fortitude, to push past fatigue and fear, became a defining characteristic of their resistance. Conversely, the mounting losses and the unexpected resilience of the settlers began to chip away at the bandits' morale. Crow, despite his outward bravura, was becoming increasingly desperate. The tactical advantages he had expected to leverage were being systematically dismantled. The coordinated firing from the higher ground, coupled with the settlers' effective use of cover, meant that Crow's men were taking casualties without achieving significant breakthroughs. This attrition, both physical and psychological, started to sow seeds of doubt within their ranks. The initial confidence that had fueled their attack was gradually being replaced by uncertainty and a growing apprehension about the outcome of the engagement. The very terrain that Crow had likely considered an asset was proving to be a formidable adversary in its own right, amplifying the settlers' advantage and amplifying the bandits' growing despair. The echoes of conflict, though still ringing, in the ears begin to recede, leaving behind a landscape profoundly altered by the crucible of shared adversity. Reflecting on this journey so far, one can perceive how the disparate elements of struggle, resilience, and unexpected courage have woven themselves into a singular potent tapestry. The initial despair, a suffocating blanket over Abigail's world, has gradually yielded to a more determined spirit, not of vengeance, but of reclamation. Similarly, Nathaniel's solitary existence, marked by the quiet stoicism of enduring loss, has found a new anchor, a shared purpose that resonates deeper than the silence he had cultivated. The very fabric of their interconnectedness, initially frayed by circumstance, has been strengthened through the shared trials, each challenge met serving to forge a more robust bond, much like iron tempered by repeated heating and hammering. The implications of these converging threads suggest a fundamental redefinition of strength in this unforgiving territory. It is no longer solely measured by the capacity for violence or the accumulation of material wealth, but by the unwavering commitment to protect what is precious and to rebuild what has been broken. The fear that once paralyzed the community has, through concerted action and shared vulnerability, begun to dissipate, replaced by a nascent sense of collective efficacy. This transformation signifies a pivotal moment where the passive acceptance of hardship gives way to an active shaping of destiny, a testament to the human capacity for adaptation and growth even in the face of overwhelming odds. The lessons learned, etched not just in memory, but in the very actions taken, speak to a profound understanding that true restoration involves not just the return of what was lost, but the cultivation of a new, stronger foundation. As we pivot towards the final reflection, it becomes evident that the narrative's trajectory has been guided by an unfolding realization that the most significant victories are often not those achieved through brute force alone, but through the enduring power of human connection and the unwavering pursuit of what is right. The initial promise, born from a moment of profound despair, has been tested, refined, and ultimately validated through a series of trials that demanded immense fortitude from all involved. The journey has illuminated the intricate interplay between personal loss and collective action, demonstrating how individual acts of bravery can ripple outwards, inspiring a shared sense of purpose and transforming the very landscape of possibility. The path forward, illuminated by these insights, points towards a future where the wounds of the past can serve as the foundation for a more resilient and hopeful tomorrow. The dust of the canyon had settled, but the profound transformation it bore witness to was far from over. Abigail, standing beside Nathaniel as the first hesitant rays of dawn crested the rugged peaks, no longer saw the world through the lens of what was stolen. The raw, aching void left by Crow's savagery had been filled, not by a simple return of possessions, but by the immeasurable strength forged in the fires of shared struggle. Her father's ranch, the cattle, the very sense of security that had been ripped away, were now more than just memories of loss. They were the foundational stones of a future built with deliberate courage and an unyielding spirit. Nathaniel, his shoulder bandaged but his gaze steady, held her hand, his touch a silent affirmation of a promise kept and a new one implicitly made. The promise wasn't just about rebuilding what was lost, but about cultivating something even, more resilient, a testament to the enduring power of human connection in the face of overwhelming adversity. The true measure of their victory lay not in the vanquished outlaw or the recovered livestock, but in the quiet revolution that had taken root within the heart of the Arizona Territory. Fear, once a pervasive shadow, had been confronted and pushed back, replaced by the burgeoning confidence of a community that had discovered its collective voice and its inherent strength. The settlers, united by shared sacrifice and the undeniable bravery displayed by individuals like Abigail, had learned that their true power resided not in isolation, but in their ability to stand together, to defend one another, and to envision a future where justice and peace were not abstract ideals, but achievable realities. This hard-won understanding was the true elixir, the enduring legacy of their ordeal. Nathaniel's promise, "Then I'll give it back," and more, had been fulfilled in ways that transcended mere material restitution. The more he offered was the restoration of hope, the rekindling of courage, and the profound realization that even in the bleakest of times, the human heart possessed an extraordinary capacity for love, resilience, and redemption. The harsh landscape of the frontier, which had once seemed to amplify their isolation and vulnerability, now served as a testament to their enduring spirit. It was a reminder that even the most formidable challenges could be overcome when individuals chose to face them together, their individual strengths amplified by the bonds of shared purpose and mutual respect. The true practice begins now, as they carry forward the lessons etched into their very beings. It is in the daily tending of the land, the raising of families, and the continued cultivation of the community spirit that their resilience will be truly tested and ultimately proven. The memory of Crow's cruelty will serve not as a haunting spectre, but as a stark reminder of the preciousness of what they have fought for and rebuilt. The story of Abigail and Nathaniel is a testament to the profound truth that love, in its most potent form, is not merely a feeling, but an active force, a force that can mend what is broken, illuminate what is dark, and ultimately build anew, stronger than before. The sun rising over Arizona now cast a light not of impending danger, but of a hard-earned promise, a future shaped by courage, fortified by love, and illuminated by the unyielding strength of the human spirit.